Hello, everybody. My name is Beck Griffin. This is the Deep Dive Project. And today we are going to be continuing a conversation that I began in a previous video about a historical event that I learned about, a program that existed in Spain for far longer than it should have, that was funded by the government and administered by organizations affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, including Opus Dei. So if you have not seen that first video, you can go and find it on my channel. There is some context there, but because I'm going to be reading news articles here today, there will be context provided throughout, so it's not the end of the world if you haven't seen that first part yet. I just wanted to break all of this up into shorter pieces because the content is quite heavy, and also I understand that not everyone is into a 2-hour long video, so I'm trying to break it up, and hopefully that works better for everyone because, again, this is important information. I want people to see this and I want people to learn about it, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up and consider sharing this with someone that you know. So here's the first article that we are going to be reading today. This was published in the fall of 2025. The headline reads, "One of the survivors of the Women's Board in Solidarities, quote, they were like a Spanish Gestapo for women. Consuelo Garcia del Cid was interned in this Francoist institution where girls who did not fit in with the regime's morals were locked up." Consuelo Garcia del Cid was 16 years old when she was transferred to a reformatory in Madrid. The crime? Changing her dress code and protesting against the established order. "One morning, my mother came into my room with an Opus Dei doctor." This is a quote from her. "They told me they were going to give me a flu shot. I don't remember anything else. I woke up in a room I didn't know. I cried a lot." The Patronato de Protección a la Mujer was a Francoist institution of repression where they interned young adolescents between the age of 16 and 25 years old who, in the eyes of the regime, did not fit the model of femininity at the time. Of course, the most important age range. Opus Dei knows this. The Francoist regime knew this. Any regime or authoritarian power knows that it is critically important to get to people when? Before their brains have fully developed. Why? Because once your brain is fully developed, you're not going to be able to be tricked and coerced into the same sorts of things that you might when you're younger and a little bit more ignorant and has a brain that is just not completely finished. And when does your brain, when is it like commonly believed that your brain kind of fully reaches its like full maturation? 25 years old. I just think that's worth pointing out. Born in Spain in 1941, it had internment centers generally run by religious orders that worked on the re-education of the inmates. Consuelo, one of them, speaks harshly about it in the program Solidarities with Mercè Folch. There are no embellishments in what she says. She pours out all of her experience without concessions. You felt the weight of Francoism. The existence of this system of control over girls during Francoism is almost unknown to most of the population, and this adds another layer of pain to its survivors. A previous article that I read in the last video stated that because of the fact that there was no like common identity that all of these different concentration camps basically operated under, that girls would be taken into these things and not even know that they were a part of this protection of women program thing. They simply have no idea and don't, to this day, their descendants, their family members don't know that. So the actual scale of this atrocity and its impact is kind of incalculable. And they call it a Spanish-style Gestapo for women, which is fucking horrifying. The internment centers, supervised by religious congregations such as the Adorers, the Oblates, or the Trinitarians, were scattered throughout Spain, and the nuns deployed a machinery of violence, guilt, and terror. The Women's Protection Board did not end with Franco's death, but continued to function well into the 1980s, and I feel like this is just another perfect example of how human rights and women's rights, more specifically, are still in their infancy, are still so easily overtaken by more powerful forces because women's rights are not enshrined in a lot of countries like constitutions. They aren't like recognized in the same way. And so there's been numerous examples of things that like conditions or requirements or expectations that existed in society well past the point when societal norms and like perspectives had changed. I mean, here in the United States, one very well-known example is that marital rape wasn't a crime until the 90s. You still have dozens of people advocating against that, saying that marital rape doesn't exist, and it wasn't even a crime in America until the 90s. So this is all still so new. And these events, therefore, are relatively recent in our collective history. I understand if you're Gen Z or Gen Alpha, the 1980s probably seems like the dark ages, but in terms of like historical time, it was just the other day. Consuelo has spent more than a decade researching these reformatories with the aim of fighting against the oblivion that the survivors experienced with the arrival of democracy. The path is now one of recognition and reparation. The victims want a political gesture which includes an ex officio investigation into serious human rights violations, which has not yet arrived. So they're looking for some type of justice. In Catalonia, at the request of Esquerra, the Commons, and the CUP, the creation of a commission has been requested to investigate the abuse and mistreatment of thousands of women who spent their youth in the reformatories of the Patronato. So there were demands being made back in the fall of 2025, so very, very recently. Outcries are beginning to crop up from people, some of whom are survivors, some of whom are offspring of these survivors, and some of whom are simply caring and concerned members of the public, activists who are demanding some type of accountability from their government now that the true scope and scale of this entire atrocity is like really becoming fully known. Here's an article that was carried in The Guardian, and this was published in June of 2025, so a few months before this previous article. And it's pretty good too. It says, it's not a genuine apology. Spanish women reject Catholic attempt to redress Franco incarceration. So, you know, there's a expectation that the government needs to do something, and there's also the expectation that the religious institution that was overseeing all of these different organizations that were administering these, I'm going to keep calling them as I see them, concentration camps, need to have some type of reckoning as well. The subheading says that many survivors believe organizations' request for forgiveness over abuse in women's protection board centers does not go far enough, and I would say that I absolutely agree. Simply saying, hey, we're sorry that that happened to you and that we were complicit in it, that's a super bummer, that's not good enough. That's not good enough when you're talking about hijacking and destroying so many people's lives, thousands and thousands of people and generations on down the line that will be impacted by this kind of thing. As the members of the Catholic organization wrapped up their speech with an appeal for forgiveness, the auditorium in Madrid exploded in rage. For decades, many in the audience had grappled with the scars left by their time in a Catholic-run institution. Now they were on their feet chanting truth, justice, and reparations, and laying bare their rejection of any apology. Neither forget nor forgive. And you know, it is a super unfortunate fact, but a fact nonetheless, that a religious organization, and such a powerful one at that, with a 2,000-year paper trail of abuse, is also implicated and wrapped up in this entire thing. But it is a fact, and you know, it gives me cause to ask, as I did in my last video, if not authoritarian, why authoritarian shaped? It was an unprecedented response to an unprecedented moment in Spain, hinting at the deep fissures that linger over one of the longest running and least known institutions of Francisco Franco's dictatorship, the Catholic-run centers that incarcerated thousands of women and girls as young as 8, subjecting them to barbaric punishments, forced labor, and religious indoctrination. Here's a picture of some of them. These poor girls, young women in the Women's Protection Board Center in Seville. The centers operated under the direction of the Women's Protection Board, a state-run institution revived in 1941 and helmed by Franco's wife, Carmen Polo. They aimed to rehabilitate fallen women aged 15 to 25. I mean, how far can you fall at that age, honestly? As well as others deemed to be at risk of deviating from the narrow path marked out for women during the dictatorship. Get on board with what we're asking you to do, or we're going to force you. And, it's frightening because I feel like there is a similar sort of trend that I'm beginning to see take shape here in this country. It's not anywhere near to this point yet. They're still trying to dangle carrots in front of women's faces. Hey, we'll give you money if you have kids. Hey, you want some extra money if you have more kids and stay home and take care of them. They're still trying to coax women because there's this moralistic outrage and concern in this country right now that the birth rate is in decline, which, as someone who lives with both feet firmly planted on reality and who only just this past weekend was in Walmart, I find that perspective very hard to get on board with. The fear just does not really speak to me. I am seeing children everywhere. I think that there is a contingent of very specific people with a very specific agenda and a very specific perspective that are concerned about a certain kind of woman not having children anymore. And I think that is what the entire thing is about. But it exists nonetheless. They're trying right now to suggest offering money and incentives and tax breaks and all of these different things. Hasn't reached the point yet where they want to force people. But I know how history plays. I know where this is going to end up if things aren't put to a stop now. I know how this goes. We're reading about it right now. Survivors describe a reality that was brutal. It was the greatest atrocity Spain has committed against women, said Consuelo Garcia del Cid, who was drugged by a doctor at her home in Barcelona and taken to a center in Madrid at the age of 16. And remember, it said in the other article that it was an Opus Dei psychiatrist, specifically, who drugged her. Then, in this particular case, this Opus Dei psychiatrist was helping to facilitate this girl being detained, apprehended, and locked away in a concentration camp. Isn't that lovely? That's real Christian. In her case, her family had branded her rebellious after she attended rallies against the dictatorship. In Franco's Spain, a fallen woman could be anyone. If you were poor, an orphan, if your family faced hardship, if you were a bad student or wore a miniskirt or kissed your boyfriend in a cinema or danced too close, anything was enough. How dare you be human? And how dare you have your own wants and desires? And how dare you make those wants and desires known? And how dare you go against the groupthink? That's exactly what is happening here. And it makes me freaking itch, especially during a time where I feel like you can see some of the same kind of attitudes being expressed here in like American political discourse. Many women were hauled into the centers in handcuffs after being singled out by priests, neighbors, or relatives. So someone just, your nosy neighbor.
I don't really like the way that Marina comes out in the afternoons and sits and reads a book and suns her legs. That's pretty scandalous.
Maybe that'd be enough to get somebody taken out of their home and locked away. And the others were reported by state employees known as the Guardians of Morality police. Lovely. Lovely. George Orwell's rolling, tossing, and turning in his grave. Patrolled the streets and venues such as movie theaters, swimming pools, and gardens, calling the police anytime they spotted a woman they believed to be in moral danger. And it was their moral danger, of course, the prevailing opinion of the powers that be. This wasn't anything like natural in any way, shape, or form. We're not talking about people committing crimes. We're talking about people just existing and being different from what was the expected norm of the time. What does that make you think of? It was a covert prison system for minors, she said. You couldn't go out, your mail was censored, visits were supervised by a nun. They had us working all the time, scrubbing and praying. We worked for free, sewing embroidery, knitting, doll making. We weren't allowed to speak freely to each other. We couldn't have friends. They were watching us all the time. Well, I have to say, that sounds like being in prison. That also sounds like what many former female members of Opus Dei have described existing in: working for free, not being allowed to have relationships with the other people that they're working for, being worked so hard that there's no time for anything else, having visits with family members and phone calls and mail correspondence screened and censored. This is all stuff that people in Opus Dei, men and women, men as well, it's not just the women, have reported having experiences like that. And it seems to me, I can kind of see where Opus Dei, and ergo the organization's founder, got his inspiration for everything. It came right out of Franco's Spain, which is something that myself and many other people have said many, many times about Opus Dei, and I feel like this is proof positive. The centers, which are believed to have held more than 40,000 young women and girls at their peak. So in another video, I said hundreds of thousands of people, maybe, perhaps a bit hyperbolic, but thousands, very, very easily, of women and girls went through this really repressive and terrible system. And it didn't close until 1985, 10 years after Franco's death. Here's another picture of some of these girls, young women at a Women's Protection Board center. Clearly, they are not all right. Amid pressure from survivors and after more than a year investigating their claims, Confer, a Catholic body representing more than 400 Congregationists, including many with ties to the centers, said it was ready to seek forgiveness for what had happened. The ceremony, the first of its kind in Spain, got underway on Monday with the chair of Confer explaining that the organization was ready to break its decades of silence over what had happened. Quote, We acknowledge this page in our history. This is an exercise in moral and historical responsibility, an opportunity to acknowledge that what we did not do well in the past and express our empathy and deep sorrow to all of these women, which is good. That does need to happen. He contextualized the centers within the narrow norms of a dictatorship that had rolled back the rights of women, requiring them to obtain the permission of male guardians to work, travel, or open a bank account. It was a time of severe educational, social, political, and religious restrictions, he said. His remarks were followed by an audio compilation of survivors' testimonies. Some spoke of wrestling with abuse by nuns when they were just 8 or 11 years old. Others told of punishments that ranged from rubbing nettles on the vulvas of those who wet the bed to forcing people to eat their own vomit or draw crosses on the floor with their tongues. Inhumane and abhorrent. Quote, in the name of what God was this done? One woman asked, what kind of religious women could carry out such evil against children who had committed no crime? Most remembered the centers as places of beatings, verbal abuse, gnawing hunger, and cold. Some spoke of the decades it had taken them to learn to live with their experience, while others hinted that those who had been consumed by the trauma had turned to drugs or suicide. By the time the 3 members of Confer stood up to ask formally for forgiveness, emotions were high, as many survivors, flanked by their families and historical memory campaigners, began chanting, brandishing signs that read no, and raising their voices as organizers tried to drown them out with music. Confer suspended the event. Because it's not just enough to kind of apologize. That's not enough. It just isn't. People's lives have been ruined. Their lives, the ability to move through the world as a human being has been destroyed. There has to be something else than just a, hey, we're sorry. That's not good enough. And I am baffled by the confusion that organizations seem to have over that fact, the fact that it's not enough for them to just apologize and expect that everyone will go along with whatever they're saying. I don't understand the confusion. Survivors were swift to explain their reaction. "It's not a genuine apology," said Dolores Gomez, who was sent to a center at 13 after she told a psychiatrist that her father was sexually abusing her. Quote, "This is just a facelift." And in a previous article, I read a story about a 14-year-old girl who was sent to one of these places at the age of 14 because she was pregnant out of wedlock. And I had cause to question at the time, who got her pregnant? And now, here's another example of someone who was sent to a center because she told someone that she was being sexually abused. But rather than the abuser being held accountable, being taken away and locked up, which they absolutely should be, she was. And why is that? You know, my experience growing up in purity culture in America in the aughts and like early teens was that a disproportionate, inordinate, inappropriate degree of responsibility is placed on the shoulders of women and girls in conservative religion and in conservative like culture in general. The responsibility for the things that happen to you, specifically the things that are done to you by men, are oftentimes put on the shoulders of the victim, of the woman or the girl. And I feel like this is one of the roots of that kind of idea, which is still alive and well and rears its ugly head anytime there's any type of like high profile sexual abuse scandal or something like that. The victim blamers are always some of the first rushing to the comment sections. But who is actually causing the harm in these cases? Because I can assure you it's not the children, categorically. The audio that had played during the ceremony had been edited to omit some claims, including those of women who said they had been pressured to give up their babies for adoption, said Gomez. Of course, no one wants to acknowledge the fact that the government and the Catholic Church more broadly has been complicit in a wide range of human rights abuses, including the theft and sale of children. Isn't that nice? Isn't that lovely? Quote, "They're not asking for forgiveness for all that happened. They're only asking forgiveness for the actions they are willing to recognize, of course." After a few months at the center, Gomez escaped, choosing to return home and risk her father's abuse over the nuns' treatment. At 15, she was sent back after her father raped her, leaving her pregnant. That following year, the nuns granted her father permission to take her out during the Easter holidays, allowing him to again rape and impregnate her. It took Gomez years to track down her children and start the painstaking process of building a relationship with them. I'm going to need somebody to come in and tell me how any of this system undoes, rectifies, or corrects any of the previous harm that is done when a child is abused or when a young girl becomes pregnant. How is this fixing anything? How is this doing anything other than continuing to protect the people who are the ones causing the most harm, actually? I fail to see how this is a solution to anything. It's absolutely insane. While Confer has been clear in asking the women for forgiveness, there was little sign they had delved into their own consciousness and how they had allowed this to happen, said Paca Blanco, whose conservative family institutionalized her at 15 after she returned home from a party. Quote, "They need to ask forgiveness of themselves first," she said. "How do you apologize to teenage girls that you have tortured, mistreated, disrespected, and exploited for labor? You've stolen their babies. How do you apologize for that? How? I don't even know. I don't think you can, ever sufficiently. I think you should have to spend the rest of your miserable life, the rest of the organization's miserable life, trying to make it right. I think organizations should be going bankrupt. trying to make it right. It reminds me of the TTI thing that we have in this country, the troubled teen industry, which is a very similar sort of thing where parents with unruly children that they can't control, and I'm not going to say that some children don't have serious behavioral problems and need help, because they do, legitimately. We all need help. We're all people, but it's sad to say, there are parents who are not equipped to give their children that help. And their idea of helping is calling someone to come into their home in the middle of the night and rip their child kicking and screaming out of their bed to send them away to a wilderness school or camp for the next 6 months to a year to 2 years to 4, to basically be like a slave and a prisoner of these people. And there's an entire industry around it. TTI, look it up if you don't know. It's very, very similar. It feels like history is just continuing to repeat itself over and over and over again. These people, they just scatter and regroup and find new ways to continue to victimize and control people. It's like, if there's one thing you can be sure of in this world, aside from death and taxes, it's that there are always going to be people like this who want to prey on and control and completely overcome groups of people for no other reason, I think, than just like the rush it gives them to feel like they have the moral superiority and they're doing something good. People will convince themselves of anything, and will do almost anything once they've convinced themselves that they are a part of the solution, that they're on the right side, that they have the moral authority here. They will do almost anything, as history is continuing to show us time after time after time after time. Some survivors have disagreed. Quote, "I would have liked if we could have made it to the end of the event. So not everyone was happy about the fact that this event devolved into a protest," said Mariaje Lopez, who was 8 when she was sent to live with the nuns. So this is not just 16 to 25-year-old young women. This is little girls, barely out of toddlerhood. What in the world could an 8-year-old girl have done to deserve being locked away in a concentration camp run by psychotic religious nut jobs funded by a fascist government? What could they have possibly done at 8 years old? Like I said, you're going to be hard-pressed to convince me that there was ever any sort of justification for this, and I will never be able to get on board with anything present day that is trying to do anything similar, and I condemn every single program that deprives people of liberty for anything other than a very serious and obvious breach of a law. Morality is not a good enough reason. Sorry, your moral worldview is not a good enough reason for people to be deprived of their rights. I'm sorry if that incenses you and upsets you. I'm sorry if that hurts your fifis, that you can't live in the worldview that you want to because you can't control people. But guess what? You can't. It's not right. I'm not going to stand for it. This is absolutely disgusting, and the fact that this happened is abhorrent. It was clear to everyone that Monday's apology, accepted or not, was the tepid beginnings of a much longer journey. We have such a long way to go. And do you think that this has only happened in Spain? No. No, it's happened everywhere. It's happening now. Subscribe if you want to learn more. Garcia del Cid has requested a meeting with Spain's Minister of Justice, hoping to have survivors formally recognized as victims of the dictatorship and potentially paving the way for a response along the lines of Ireland's 2013 apology and reparations for the abuses that took place in its Magdalene laundries. If you don't know about the Magdalene laundries, another very similar situation that I will be devoting some time to talking about in the not too distant future. In Spain, though, there has been little fallout from the role that church and state played in operating the centers. The congregations had never faced any kind of reckoning, with many of them continuing to receive public funding, said Garcia del Cid. Well, of course. They're the ones in power. They're the ones writing history because they're the victors. They're the ones telling everyone to just pray and not worry. And people are still filling their pews every single Sunday and holy day of obligation, still putting that money into that basket, still supporting, if by no other means than by having a physical presence there, the efforts and the ongoing production of these religious institutions and organizations. So without some type of like massive societal awakening on the part of like religious communities as a whole, I don't really know how much we can expect. And it sucks to say that, but the people who are calling for change the only people doing that cannot be people like me who have already left the church and don't give a shit what happens to it anymore. It cannot be only coming from people who have been through horrific situations like this and have had their lives completely ruined. There need to be some people who still think that there is something good to be salvaged within these institutions to actually step up and start doing the right thing. Because I don't really see that happening. The progress is glacial when it's happening at all. And I cannot be the only one pointing this out, because it's not going to move the needle for people who continue to buy into these systems, continue to participate in these religious institutions, and who continue to put themselves and their loved ones potentially in harm's way in a system that has demonstrated time after time after time after time after time after time that it cannot be trusted to actually protect people and to uphold the rights of those who are basically hung out to dry. Actually, they'll be a part of hanging them out to dry, as the historical record has shown. Hovering over all of this is the question of just how these centers were able to continue operating after the death of Franco, leaving young women incarcerated even as Spain transitioned to a democracy. Quote, "They forgot about us. We didn't matter," said Garcia del Cid. "They need to explain a lot to us. Democracy owes us 10 years of life. At a minimum. At a minimum, 10 years of life." So this is the second part of my ongoing conversation about this program that existed in Spain and how absolutely insane I think it is, calling out the different entities that have been involved with it, Catholic organizations like Opus Dei. And I hope that you can see why this is like an important topic to be discussing, especially now with prevailing conversations with women's rights the world over, and particularly here in this country, coming under greater and greater fire. And I hope that you will consider sticking around, because I have a second or a third part that I will be releasing about all of this in the not too distant future as well. I'm breaking all of this up because this is very heavy and I want the information to reach people, and it may not if it's all buried in a 2.5 hour long video. So hence why I am breaking this up. But thank you for giving me your attention for this video today. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Is this something that you knew about? And if so, what other crazy historical human rights crises and abuses do you know about that you think deserve more attention and more public awareness? I would like to know. That is where I'm going to leave this one for right now. Thank you so much for being here. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Did I say that already? I can't remember. It's all starting to blur. Resources for anyone, if you're struggling mental health, know someone who is. I've compiled a list of resources in the description down below. Please make use of those. Life is very hard, but we don't have to go at it alone or totally unequipped. There are people who want to help. So if you need help, please reach out. Ways to connect with me across social media and support my various endeavors are also all linked down below. And that is all for now. I'll have a new video for you very, very soon. But in the meantime, don't forget, everyone, nolite te bastardes carborandorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.